Tonight, we have the gift of hearing from Dr. Broderick Leeks. Dr. Leeks is the Director of Counseling and Mental Health at the University of Southern California Student Health, and he's the Clinical Associate Professor of Psychiatry and the Behavioral Sciences at the Keck School of Medicine. He's going to introduce himself further in a moment as he shares a story, but I wanted to say it's been a joy getting to know him better as he's worked with us in preparing for this event. And I'm looking forward to hearing from him today or tonight, depending where you live in the country. So welcome, Dr. Leeks.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you all, and such a blessing and a pleasure to spend this time with you all to talk about a really important topic, as Don Paul mentioned. And hopefully, we'll have a time of good conversation, but also some good information as we move through the evening. So let me get my slide life together here. And can everyone see my screen okay? All right, and are you all seeing the full view or the presenter view on your end?
We may be in the presenter view. I see with the slides coming up as well as the one you have up.
Okay, let me address that, sorry. Okay, let's try this.
That looks right.
Perfect, okay. All right, so let's get started. So just a little bit about me. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I received my PhD in clinical psychology as well as my master's in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary out here in California in Pasadena. Had a really wonderful time at Fuller and really learned a lot there in terms of clinical psychology work, but also the integration of mental health and theology. I'm currently enrolled in the Executive Master of Health Administration program here at USC. I lead one of the largest counseling centers, if not the largest in the country, and really wanted to develop some additional administrative and leadership skills, and that program has been really amazing and giving me additional tools. I serve as vice chair for student mental health. Our counseling center is part of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Keck School of Medicine. And so I oversee student mental health for the university. And I spend most of my time in my director role overseeing counseling and mental health services in USC Student Health. And I have and I also teach courses at the university, but also have the distinct privilege and pleasure of actually living on campus as faculty and residents. I've been living on campus for right at 5 years now. And I plan on living on campus for about 3 more years before I return back to civilian life. But it's been really amazing to live alongside and partner with the students, especially as my family and my children are exposed to the college students. And speaking of my family, here's who I am, and despite all of the titles and everything on the previous slide, this is what's most important to me outside of my faith. And you'll see my wife Cynthia, who I met at Baylor University, which we'll be talking a little bit about later. My son Maxwell, who's 13, and then my daughter Alanis, who will be 3 next month. And they really ground me and give me a sense of purpose, and you'll be hearing a little bit about them later, but I want to show you a little bit about who I am and what motivates me to keep pushing. So today, I'm going to share a little bit about my transition to through higher education, culminating in graduate school, and then we'll have an opportunity for you all to kind of share a little bit about your experience in grad school and things. If there's any parts of my story that resonate with you, then we'll talk a little bit about mental health concerns for college and graduate students. And I'm not sure why my computer is fighting me today. And then we'll talk about some coping tools and skills. And then we'll talk about bystander, things you can do to look out for each other. And so I, grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, in the South. And my mom had me when she was 16. And so my mom was a top student at her high school and did really well academically and extracurricularly, but she was a teen mom, and that came with some cool things for me and having a cool hip mom, but it also posed a lot of challenges, of course, with any teenager having to raise a kid, and financial challenges. But luckily, I had a very supportive family. And so my grandmother was my primary caregiver while my mom was finishing university. And so that was really nice to have that family presence. Memphis was great. I thought it was a huge city until I moved to Houston and then Los Angeles, but I had a really great time in Memphis, and I was in a very homogenous neighborhood. I would say the neighborhood I grew up in was 99.9% African American. So the only people outside of the African American community that I would engage with would be my teachers at school, or maybe law enforcement that would come into the neighborhood, or if I went to the doctor's office. And so just very kind of homogenous neighborhood. The differences came in SES. And so even though racially and ethnically it was very similar, there were SES differences within the neighborhood that would cause some conflict. And we had a housing project that wasn't too far from us. And so some of the kids from the housing project would sometimes get into it with us. And they were just in a really rough kind of situation. So here's my house. I'm at the bottom in Memphis. This was the house that my mother was raised in with her. There's 10 kids total. She had 8 brothers and 1 sister. So I had a huge family that showed me a lot of love. But this was only a 3-bedroom house. So you can imagine having all of those at some point. By the time I came along, many of the older siblings had aged out and went off to university or working somewhere. And again, you know, at the time this neighborhood was built, of course, it was segregated Tennessee. And so this was considered a solid kind of middle class home. My grandfather had a nice factory job. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the household and running the household. But they had a car, they, you know, had a house. And then the neighborhood has kind of transitioned to more lower SES now, with high crime and drugs. But I still go back and visit and get to see some of my friends that I grew up with. The pictures at the top, my elementary school, and then on the right was my church that I grew up in. And church was a major part of my upbringing. My family was very faith oriented and faith centric. And so I went to a Baptist church growing up. And it was just a huge part of our life. So at this time, very homogenous environment, very loving environment. And I felt a ton of love growing up. Then I moved to Houston, Texas. So my mom got married when I was 8 years old to my stepfather, who I loved and adored. And I finally felt like I had a regular family. And so my mom, my stepfather, shortly thereafter, my first brother was born. And I just had this sense of like, hey, this is like what it's supposed to look like. And I knew my biological father, but of course they were teen parents. And so they weren't married or living together or anything. So I felt like I had arrived. But this was the first time I had really started to know what racism was, or being called the N-word. When I moved to Houston, just a very much more diverse community that I was in. And it was interesting, to say the least. But we were young boys, and, you know, my friends, and so they might, you know, say something, call us the N-word, and we would fight, and then we'd be playing again the next day. But even at that age, I would kind of wonder where they were hearing that from, or why they would be saying those types of things. And sometimes the parents would step in and chastise them and say, you're not supposed to talk like that. You know, that's not our family values. But others, I'm like, well, they're hearing it from somewhere. And so again, it was kind of, I was exposed to new cultures, and I loved Houston because it was very diverse. We had a lot of different ethnic groups represented, but I did kind of start to notice ethnic differences and some of the tension associated with that. This was my house in Houston. I remember moving there, and when we first moved to Houston, we lived in an apartment, and so I thought we were rich. So I ran into the house. I'm like, we're rich. And I had my own room, and we had a front and a backyard. I remember my aunt looked at me. She's like, "You're not rich." And I was like, "Why are you hating on me?" But it was just really cool. Again, a regular family. We had a house. And of course, now that I'm older, this is not like a wealthy neighborhood or anything, but to me, it was a big deal. One of the things I noticed was the neighborhood was it was very diverse, but we had a lot of African American, Latinx, Asian, Caucasian families. So it was really diverse. But pretty much on my street, there was a large African American and Latinx population, except for this family right next to us, which was Asian American identified family. And I have pretty much been in every single house on the block just playing or just, because a lot of the kids were our age, but I have never stepped foot in this house. And again, it was kind of this thing where it's like, like I know that my neighbors are friendly towards me, but they didn't feel very welcoming. And then you're left wondering if it has something to do with race or some other thing that was going on, especially when it was such a stark difference from all the other families. And so as a child growing up, you're thinking about these societal, cultural things, what's going on, what's happening, that kind of you store away, and it affects how I view myself, but then also how I navigate it with others. I was very talented academically. I really cared about school, but that was not the coolest thing at the time to be. And so sports really gave me a lot of social capital, because even though I was in the nerd classes, I was in gifted and talented classes, but I was able to be parts of the sports teams at the school, which really allowed me to be accepted on a broader scale, or at least more so than I would if I didn't play sports. And there's young Broderick at the bottom. I think that's 7th grade, and just trying to figure out life. High school, again, I went to a predominantly African American high school, but I think one of the things that stood out to me was I was in gifted and talented classes, and again, it was diverse, but the ratio was really off. And so my class was definitely predominantly Caucasian and Asian in those classes, with a lower amount of African American students. And so I was kind of insulated in this little bubble, but then I would go out into the broader school, broader community, and be kind of more connected with other African American students. But even despite my academic success, even despite a lot of the awards and stuff that I received academically, there was still this little weird dynamic with some of the teachers. And I remember we won the state championship in the academic octathlon. And the octathlon was an academic event for freshmen and sophomores, and then the decathlon was for the juniors and seniors. And so we won first place in the state of Texas, and the team selected me to bring the trophy back and present it to the principal for the trophy case. And I remember one of my teachers, and it baffles me to this day, because I think I had an A in their class. They're like, "You're on that team?" And I just remember feeling a little deflated at the time and not sure, like, is she saying that because I'm Black? Is she saying that for some other reason? And again, it's just these little things that happen where it just causes you to kind of take a pause. And then I remember another teacher, when we were writing our letters to get into university, our statement letters and essays for admissions. And I gave it, to my teacher. I think it was like a math or science teacher, to just read over. I think the teacher even asked, could they read it? And they're like, "You wrote this?" And just the shock. And I'm like, I'm in gifted it. Like, what is going on? So again, these little doubts that were there, which were also balanced by a ton of love and a ton of support from all over, but it didn't kind of totally cover some of the wounds with some of these. And so all of these events, from some of the racist comments to some of the questioning, in addition to all of the love and all of the support and accolades, I'm bringing that to college, to undergrad. I'm taking all of my history with me as I walk into university. And I had a new living situation. Unfortunately, my mom and stepdad got a divorce. And so my mom and my brothers had to move to a really low SES area. This was the house on the bottom left that we grew up in. There was a lot of drug activity and prostitution not too far, right on this corner over here. And so my mom always says I went through culture shock when we moved there, because it was just a really tough financial situation we were in. And then I go to university, and this on the right, this is my apartment complex. They ran out of dorm space, and they moved like about 150 freshmen into a brand new apartment complex. I had a 4-bedroom apartment, my own bedroom, I had a fireplace. It was immaculate. And I felt a lot of guilt because I was living much better than my family was back home. And I'm worried about them and trying to kind of focus on school, but feeling a little weird that, I was in the dining halls eating all you can eat. And I knew that my mom and brothers were struggling. So mentally that was draining. And then also I remember a young lady in front of me, and she called the financial aid office and basically asked her dad, she's like, which checking account do you want me to pay my tuition with? I didn't even know people could pay tuition. And so that was another shock to my system, because, I was getting everything fully funded by either scholarships or loans and grants. And so just the fact that someone literally wrote a check and covered their expenses, and what does that do when you're sitting in class next to someone, knowing that I came from a lower SES background and this person has more means, and with identity and confidence and all of those kind of things. Here's some pictures of college. I had a really great college experience, a lot of fun, and again, a lot of love and support. But there were still these kind of issues in terms of race and identity. I remember, I graduated near the top of my class in high school, but then I get to college, and most of my classes, I was the only African-American in the class, definitely the only African-American male, and just kind of figuring out, and it's like, well, if I raise my hand, not only do I need to be 100% sure that I know the answer, but I need to also communicate in the perfect language, not to feed into any stereotypes that I knew existed, just hearing offhand comments from others at the university. And stereotype threat is real, and it really affects performance. There's been countless studies that kind of show the impact of stereotype threat. And for me, it played out in the sense of really not engaging with faculty. If I had a question, if I was confused about something, it really wasn't until my junior year where I felt comfortable going and talking to the faculty, just to avoid them thinking that I wasn't smart enough or capable enough to be there, because there was this fear I was there for diversity or numbers or something like that, or not even really comfortable talking with my academic advisors. And then navigating through campus, frequently, hey, what team are you on? Are you an athlete? From fellow students, but also faculty, staff, and alumni, other members of the community, and telling them, I'm actually here on academic scholarship. Oh, wow, really? And just the shock that people would have communicated something. It's like, well, we think the only reason you're here is to put a ball through the hoop or throw a football, but not, it's actually a shock to us that you're here for academics. So again, those messages kind of deliver something. And then I had some really unfortunate situations with law enforcement that, in terms of guns being pulled on me, a gun placed to my head, handcuffed, and then released because there was nothing. I just fit a description, and just the soul wound, the hurt and harm that caused me and my friends that happened to, where I actually thought I was going to die. So again, there's love, but then there's also these things I'm wrestling with in terms of my identity and how that plays out within the higher education environment and the surrounding area. And so, but despite all that, you know, I had a ton of support and love. And so this was actually one of the brochures that the school sent out to all the prospective seniors in the country. And they chose me to be on it. And so again, it's this very odd mixture of feeling loved and supported, but also knowing that I'm kind of in this other category. And then my lovely wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and this was at our bonfire, but we're posing, looking into the future, looking into the next steps. And I think at this point, I already knew that I was going to be going to grad school at Fuller. So again, just like college, all of that history that I just, the low SES, the divorce, the identity stuff, the racism I experienced, all of that stuff comes to grad school. So it just doesn't go away once you get your degree. You bring all of that history with you to grad school. And again, you know, I was really nervous. Even though I was a stellar student in high school, first couple of years of college were really rocky for a couple of different reasons, but kind of got on track, and I really kind of exercised my academic skills my last 2 years, got into a PhD program, but it still feels like you're starting over, and it's like, oh, am I here for numbers? I need diversity. Do they really want me here? Do I have what it takes? That imposter syndrome. And all of that is coming, and it feels like it's starting over. And then, of course, identity. I was the only Black male in my incoming class, and one of two in the entire program, a 6-year program at the time. And so just really coming from a place of having a community, having an identity, and then starting over kind of was a shock to the system. And really having this sense of feeling connected and feeling loved and supported by the faculty and my fellow students, but then also very isolated, being the only one that looked like me. And then trying to balance life. You know, I got married the day after first quarter finals. My girlfriend and I had been dating 2.5 years, so trying to balance that, still dealing with microaggressions. I remember I was in a doctoral program, and often people I would meet with, they'd be like, oh, so are you in the master's program? And again, there's nothing wrong at all with being in the master's program, but it was communicating something, that the assumption that I was in the master's program versus the doctoral program, and that was communicating something to me. And then finances, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about the graduate student experience. Undergrad, my family was like, hey, whatever you need, I'm getting checks left and right. They're supporting me, my extended family, my uncles and my aunt, because they knew my immediate family was struggling. But when I got to grad school, they're like, hey, well, you know, I mean, this is a choice. You're going to grad school, and we're not going to be able to give you the same amount of support, and you're married now, and you need to kind of make sure you're taking care of yourself. And which I could understand, but it was a very different experience from grad to undergrad. And then the comparison trap. You know, I had tons of friends who went straight to work after school. They're buying houses, they have these nice cars, and I'm still a broke graduate student, and really trying to kind of figure that out. And then those moments of just feeling so worn out and questioning life decisions, and did I make the right call? And I'm in this 6-year program, and all these other people are like going on vacation, living their life, and the stress and strain of pursuing the degree was interesting and a struggle at times. Here's just a couple of pictures of grad school. The reason I'm showing these because I think the community saved me. The community really helped me kind of feel at home and settled. So the top left picture, I played a ton of intramurals. Again, sports was a vehicle to really meet people and form that sense of community. So we won several championships, which was a lot of fun. The top right is actually at the Urbana conference. And so I had to work as the work study job when I was in grad school. And so it was really nice to have that really fun community at Fuller and represent the School of Psychology at Urbana. And so my wife is next to me, and then those are some of the admissions office staff. And if you can see in the far back, they actually made a big poster of my wife and I for their marketing materials. And then the bottom left, just managed family. This was our baby shower. So my wife is pregnant in that picture. And again, as a grad student, which is different than most undergrads, is really trying to manage relationships, families, and which is just a different stressors on your life. And then the bottom right, this was actually when I got accepted for my internship, which is the national match process. They threw me a party. And again, I just felt a lot of love and support that helped me get through, which will be relevant when we talk about coping later. And then the middle was my graduation, and which was a lot of fun. So I want us to spend a little bit of time in breakouts. And I just want, after hearing kind of that, what stood out to you about kind of the identity piece, the socioeconomic piece, the academic stressors, trying to navigate all the different demands of a graduate student? What's different from undergrad to grad? Any personal reactions you were having? What was coming up for you? Did you relate to any of these, or just whatever you want to explore? And so we'll have about 10 minutes or so in the breakout. Please introduce yourselves to each other as you're talking, and then kind of tackle some of these questions. And then if you could just have one person kind of serve as your group spokesperson, just to share a highlight of something that really stood out to you that you think would be relevant to share to the larger group. And I think it'll be really cool to hear. We're only going to have about 5 minutes for the larger group, so not every group will be able to share, but just please be prepared to kind of share some general highlights from anything you heard. And then when we come back, we'll debrief that and then head into some mental health stuff. So look forward to seeing you and hearing you on the backside of the breakout groups. And then there might be instructions from Don Paul or others. Let's jump into the next section, where we're going to be talking about college and graduate student mental health. And just a heads up, I think there's going to be a follow-up email to you all, and I'm more than happy to include the majority of the slide deck for your reference. And so I'm going to not do a deep dive on all of the slides, just to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time, but just know that you'll have access to the slides after. I would say over the last decade or so, there's been a pretty substantial, significant increase in mental health concerns around university students, whether undergrad or grad. I call it a slow boil, but it's been pretty consistent. When I first started at USC 13 years ago till today, it's a vastly different world. And we're just seeing a lot of increased demand for mental health services, as well as increased utilization. And with that, it's not only more people that are coming in, people are coming in with a lot more acute and severe presenting concerns. And more students are coming in with, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts, significant, severe mental illness. And college-age students, and this is typically the 18 to 24 category, are at the greatest risk and highest prevalence of mental illness compared to any other age group. And not because you're in college. College is actually a protective factor in some ways, but that age range is indicated. And then, of course, we have the cultural stuff that's going on. Some people might even call it culture wars. We also had the pandemic, with that, health concerns, financial concerns. And over the course of the pandemic, 71% of students indicated that they were really stressed and anxious, or that those feelings increased during the pandemic. And over half, 57% felt like they were unable to adequately cope with all of the stressors that they were facing. And not only students, but just across the board. And so about a third of college students nationwide have a mental health concern or issue. And we're projecting that there's going to be increased pathology, long-term challenges, and really needing to build a really robust system. At USC, we were kind of projecting numbers post-COVID to see what we would need to do in terms of expanding and shoring up our service. And so I did projections all the way from 10% to a 50% increase. And our first semester back, we had over a 100% increase in students seeking services. So it blew out all of our projections. And this is nationally occurring. I'm on the national listservs. When I go to the national conferences, this is a pretty big issue and problem that many universities are trying to solve in terms of how to meet the mental health needs of our students. You know, in terms of grad school, I'm not sure why that slide doesn't want to stay on, but there's just a slide around graduate student support or issues, and some of the common mental health concerns with graduate student. Stress, anxiety, depression are the most common reasons graduate students seek mental health services. Overall, for all college students, anxiety is number one, depression is number two. But as you can see, you know, 45% of graduate students report having emotional or stress-related problem over the past year. Many are, I mean, this was specifically at UC Berkeley. This is a report that they put out, but the data is generalizable out to a broader population. Almost half felt overwhelmed, 40% felt exhausted, and I'm sure many people in the room could, you know, resonate with those feelings. And then these are just some stats. The Center for Collegiate Mental Health puts out an annual report. I'm not going to do a deep dive on these. They'll be in the slides that you'll receive, but just anxiety and depression continue to rise year over year. More and more students are coming in with threat to self, so whether they're harming themselves or really seriously considering suicide or even attempting suicide. Many people, before they even step foot on a college campus, have already engaged in mental health services. So these slides just kind of show the trends that we've been noticing, you know, for the last, you know, 10 years. The data I showed here is from 2018, but just consistent growth and consistent, you know, increases in need. And then depression, anxiety was kind of the top choice, but we're also noticing a lot of trauma that's coming through. And many institutions are looking at trauma-informed approaches to make sure that we're adequately meeting the needs of the students. And then, you know, there pretty much most major studies will show that there's a disproportionate impact on minoritized students. Students of color have, and our LGBTQ plus students just have a lot of institutional and societal and systemic kind of forces at play that have a negative impact on mental health. A lot of our students of color, you know, face a lot of challenges at predominantly white institutions that has to be factored in. So the Steve Fund really does a lot of work and research in this area on students of color mental health and what universities need to do to try to support them. And then, of course, we have racial trauma, which has been at the forefront of a lot of our national discussions since the beginning of our country, but definitely now in the last 3 to 5 years with a lot of the protests and things that have been going on, the uprisings to really challenge some of the state of affairs in our country. And so there's just students of color have to go through all of the developmental processes that any other student has to go through, but then you also have the overlay of how our society and culture impacts those students. And you can see here some of the impact and results of that in terms of mental health. And then, of course, you know, in addition to some of the race-related stress, pandemic has really blown the top off of a lot of the issues that we're facing. And again, everybody felt the impact of the pandemic, but certain communities had a disproportionate impact. And again, it's not, you know, doesn't mean other people aren't struggling or suffering, but we need to kind of figure out the different ways that this is playing out in several communities, and you can see some of those stats here. So given the increasing diversity among college students, there's an urgent need for universities to develop and implement proactive and culturally informed programs to really increase mental health awareness and improve support for students from minority backgrounds. And many universities are taking on this charge to support the students. USC has actually done a really great job investing in mental health. And my team has really done a great job of trying to really build out this area to make sure that all of the students are getting the adequate support. And then we think about grad school, and some of these things are interesting because I think sometimes when people think about these, it's like, oh, well, this is undergrad stuff, but no, the same stuff, as I mentioned before, carries over into grad school with slightly different nuances because of the different life stage that people are in. People get homesick even in grad school, especially a lot of our international students, and that's something that, comes at play. Culture clashes, especially if you went to a very homogenous university and then you went to a different graduate school that was more diverse, different customs, ways of life, all of these things cause stressors. I know a lot of my friends who went to HBCUs who then went to a PWI for grad school and just had that huge culture shock, or vice versa, and just really trying to kind of figure out a way of life. I worked at Fuller. I was the community coordinator, and even within our community, we had a really large international population, and some of the domestic students at international, there were just clashes, and loving people, but just couldn't figure out how to kind of make it all work. Cliques. There's nothing wrong with finding a community, connecting to that community, but a lot of people feel really excluded and don't feel a part of the group. And which can be tough, especially if you had a really tight social network back in undergrad and then you get to grad school and it's really hard to find that. Or if you did not have it in undergrad, and you're thinking, hey, grad school, people are going to be more professional and mature, and the same kind of dynamics play out. It can be really tough for folks. And of course, academic pressures of just trying to make it all work. And especially, depending on your program, what you're studying, and there's just more at stake, it seems. And then finances. This is one of the most significant stressors a lot of graduate students face. And I'll show some stats later. Many graduate students, over half, don't even think they have enough to kind of make ends meet month to month. So imagine trying to figure out if you're going to be able to pay rent or get food while doing some high-level academic work, which is a lot for our students. And sometimes you just hit that wall where, you're trying to make it all work, you're trying to figure it all out, and your mind, your body just wants to just give up and just stop. And we'll hopefully be talking a little bit later about how to get past some of that. So of course, all of these lead to stress and pressure on us to try to make it all work. So you can see this later. I searched far and wide to get a very technical definition of stress for you all. So check that out when you get a chance. But the real definition of stress is the physiological reaction caused by the perception of aversive or threatening situations. So you're actually having a response caused by how you're viewing or engaging with or assessing a situation. And it was actually borrowed from an engineering term that's referring to the action of physical forces on structures. And so you have the compression or compressive stress, which is kind of crushing in, and then the tension, which is pulling apart, and then the torsion, which is twisting you. And I'm pretty sure many of you feel kind of crushed, pulled apart, and turn around a lot as you're trying to navigate grad school. And so we're going to add this to the next. So I'll come back to this as we're moving forward. So one thing I wanted to kind of talk about, so we know that mental health, college mental health has been quite a national issue. Some call it a crisis, where we know that our college students are struggling with mental health concerns. But not everyone gets a diagnosis. Not everyone, meets DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, but we also know there's a ton of stress that we might call subclinical, where it's just hard to navigate. And it feels impossible to try to figure out how to survive it, how to put some things together to make it all work for you. And so, and I'm not promising today that, you know, you're going to leave out of here and have a life plan mapped out, but hopefully there are some tools here that can help think through good ways that either you can navigate or you can provide some tools for any students you may be working with. And so I found this cartoon, but it just kind of illustrates that it feels like it's impossible. It's like one or the other, mutually exclusive. You can either take care of yourself or you can graduate. And hopefully, and many of us feel this way, but hopefully by the end of it, we won't have the same kind of feeling that the cartoon is portraying. So how do you know when you're stressed? How do you know when things are getting, because we all are going to face stress at some point, but how do you know it's kind of getting to a point where you maybe need to kind of pay a little bit more attention? And if you're noticing changes in sleep patterns, where you might be feeling like you're struggling with insomnia or just difficulty falling asleep, and you're waking up tired and not well rested. And I've had those moments where, like, I had a good 7-8 hours and I feel exhausted. Something is going on, changes in eating patterns where you feel like you just lost your appetite, or maybe you're eating too much or eating much more than you used to. Headaches, or you're noticing just they're increasing in frequency or severity. Stomach issues, and a shorter temper. Some of you all just have a temper period, but if you're noticing that it's shortening or you're a little bit more on edge, then it's something to kind of pay attention to if you're noticing any changes. And then also just, I used to be on it. I used to be able to multitask and do things, and now I'm just having difficulty finishing them. I'm always under pressure. I'm never feeling like I'm quite in front of things. And if you're also noticing just a lot of frustration and anger. And some of you might be like, hey, wow, like I hit everything on that list. And other people might have a couple, but it's important to kind of do a check-in with yourself and pay attention to kind of how you're feeling and if some of these things are happening. And so what we want to do is say, hey, is there some framework, or is there some map that I can maybe follow to try to make a dent or try to make some moves in some of these areas? And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about a wellness lifestyle approach to handling stress. And we're going to be covering these 9 different domains briefly, and then we'll have some breakouts to really kind of give you an opportunity to do a deeper dive on just mental health in general, but what are some ways you can actually incorporate or implement some of this stuff? And some of it will feel very basic, but it's a good reminder there might be some new material for you all. And I teach this stuff, I do this stuff, I do talks, and it's always even personally gratifying for me because it reminds me that I need to kind of be more intentional in my own personal life. So the first one is attitude, and the way you think about things can make a difference in how you react to events. So my clinical specialty, I specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy. So we do a lot of work around cognitive distortions, or just how you're thinking about situations and ways of kind of trying to change or balance that, which is really helpful. But the way you perceive a situation or the way that you assess a situation has a pretty major impact on how you're going to emotionally react or just react behaviorally in that situation. And so someone, cuts you off in the road, and, one thought is they're a horrible person and they need to get their license revoked, or it was an accident. That mentality will determine if I'm like road raging and trying to catch up with them, or if I just say, give them a pass, because it happens to all of us where we accidentally maybe cut someone off. But then another thing is kind of this your mindset. And there's a lot of work, especially from Carol Dweck, around fixed mindset and growth mindset. And fixed mindset is things are static, stable, unchanging, versus a growth mindset really is you feel like you can kind of develop and grow and adapt your skill set. And that's major, especially as we approach graduate school, because the fixed mindset is coming from a deficit kind of mind where I have to prove myself. And because I'm always trying to prove myself, I'm not really going to try to put myself in a position where it can be proven that I'm not up to the challenge. Versus, and I feel really bad if I get feedback versus a growth mindset that kind of is a little bit more open to grow, a little bit more open to kind of taking risk and putting yourselves in situations where you can overcome obstacles. Now, of course, all of this is contextual. All of this happens within systems that we have to be mindful of, but it's just really good to think about how attitude plays out. And the next three are just basic stuff. And I always tell people, you hear this stuff all the time and you'd be surprised how many people are like, yeah, I should be eating healthy. I should be sleeping, but just don't do it. And I just met with a group of students, and if you don't remember anything else, if you can just zero in on some of this stuff, just the basics, it really, really, really makes a difference. Good nutrition, healthy eating habits really helps, especially during stressful times, because if you treat your body, if you look at yourself as a machine, or imagine you have a car and you never wash it, you never get the oil or fluids changed, you never fill it with gas, at some point that car is going to break down. Or just say you just do the minimum and you actually give it gas because you need to get places, but you never do any maintenance. The car is, you're going to see the wear and tear happens. It's not going to perform at the same level. And our bodies are the same way. And so it's really important that we kind of take on that mindset of our bodies need to be nourished, our bodies need to be fed, and viewing food as fuel. And you want to put that, that good fuel. Gas is over $6 a gallon out here in California. I don't know where it is in your areas, but it is. It's really tough, but we want that premium, that top level fuel for ourselves, and there's actual science behind it in terms of how the diets can help us think clearly, feel more alert, and improve concentration, and then how other either poor diet or insufficient diet can really lead to fatigue, really affects our cognitive functioning, and it could aggravate and or possibly lead to stress and depression. So again, it sounds so simple, but I have to challenge myself because sometimes I'm stressed, I'm running around, I'm like, there's a bag of chips, I'm really wanting those, but then I'm like, let me grab this orange or let me grab this fruit, and I just feel better. Not only because of the benefit, but mentally I did something positive for myself. I did something healthy for myself. It doesn't mean I never eat chips. It doesn't mean I never but I'm paying attention to me. Physical activity, another one, there's a big difference when I work out versus not working out. And some of my friends, they're just workout warriors. I'm like, I don't know how you have time to do this and work out every day. And I'm like, I don't have time. But you don't have to turn into a workout warrior. There's research that shows 30 minutes of increased heart rate a day really helps you in terms of reducing stress levels, managing long-term stress, improving your mood and energy levels, reducing anxiety. And there's a ton of research around why your mood improves, your anxiety decreases because of this, sharpening mental productivity. And again, this idea of I'm doing something for me, because a lot of times we get pulled where we're constantly performing for our faculty, performing for our families, performing for our jobs. And mentally, there's this shift when you can do something for you that feels really good. And it really helps shift your perspective and outlook because you have more of a sense of control. And again, I know it's not easy. And I know that it's really hard to find time, but like I said, even 30 minutes, a couple of times a week or daily could really help. My PowerPoint was not funny, but there was a fun gift here for you, so of some workouts. Okay, sleep, another one. And I have to get onto myself about this. Consistent sleep is critical for a healthy life. And think about this. So when you're sleeping, your brain actually is storing new information, is getting rid of waste. Newer cells are communicating and reorganizing. There's cell repair going on, energy restoration, certain molecules and things are being released. And so, but we sell ourselves short. We cut ourselves short with this. And I know it sometimes we're like, well, I have to get this project done. I have to do this. And I have all these things that are pulling at me. And sleep is one of the first things to go. But it's so important. And one way I like to think about it, if you have a computer, you have to kind of like update your computer. So you'll get the little message, update, and it says, do not turn off the computer as you're updating. Like, don't mess with it while it's going through its update process. And it says, and if you disrupt this process, it could cause really bad damage to the CPU or to the computer itself. Now, of course, there's some tech people out there who can probably fix it, but to me, I view sleep the same way. Your body is updating at night, and we often cut short the updating process, which then has implications and ramifications for later. And so, again, I know it's like, well, it's easy to say this stuff here, but the actual practice of it is different. But it's not just saying it for saying its sake. There's actual biological, physical processes that are happening that are so important. And there's been a lot of studies that have linked sleep problems to mental health and mental health conditions to sleep problems, but it really makes it difficult to cope. When you're well rested and you just let stuff kind of roll off your back, or you're like, hey, I can handle this. And then other times where it's like you're on edge. And so sleep is really important. Relaxing your mind and body. Here's some really cool apps that I think have been really cool. Liberate is a mindfulness kind of meditation app that's geared towards BIPOC community. University of Wisconsin has a really cool podcast with a ton of different relaxation exercises. I actually use their site a lot with my own patients and clients that I work with. Calm.com is another one that has some really cool relaxation. Abide is actually a faith-based Christian app that has Christian-centered meditations, and then Headspace is another app. And I often tell my clients or patients, hey, try it just once a day. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to turn into like a meditation or mindfulness guru. Just there's so much research that even little pockets can really have profound impact. And I think part of this is people get so discouraged because it's like, well, I have to reconfigure and reorganize my entire life to make all of this happen. And little, just trying to get at some of the edges could also have a pretty profound impact. Spirituality, huge for me. It helps me stay grounded, and it's just not me. I'm sure many of you, but research actually backs this, where religious coping has been shown to help cope with illness, stress, depression, and actually research points that individuals who use religious coping appear to handle their conditions more effectively than those who do not use religious coping. So Kenneth Pargament has a lot of cool research out. Ellison and Levin have some good research out that really shows the impact of religious coping. But there is a difference, different types of coping where you have a more positive, where God is loving and forgiving, versus a more negative, where a punishing kind of God concept. And I'm not here to tell you kind of, but those who kind of have a more positive religious coping, where you're viewing God in a more loving, caring, forgiving God, typically have better mental health outcomes than the other kind of approach. But we can have a theological discussion around that at a different time. And then relationships. The thing I'll say about this, if you surround yourself with people that you love and that love you, it really does serve as a buffer. And I saw one of the people in the chat earlier mention that community is so important. And it is, it really carried me through. And I'm often really sad, especially with my clients that I work with, even friends or family, when they're in such toxic relationships that either they feel trapped in or they're just choosing to kind of be a part of for various reasons. And it's so draining, it's so soul crushing for them. And so really trying to surround yourself with people who love and care about you could be really, really helpful. And then just time management, super easy to say, but it's really essential because it gives you a sense of control. And it really helps you increase your productivity. If you just Google stress management site, there's a ton of different kind of things and tools and techniques that you can use. But I think sometimes we feel like we're just getting pulled in each direction and being pulled and tossed to and fro. And I have some of my colleagues and myself when I'm like on top of it and just, hey, here's my schedule. Here's what I need to do. Here's my to-do list. Here's my prioritized to-do list. This is stuff that has to happen today and stuff that I can put off for next week or a month from now. And it really helps to organize that way because there's a million fires that pop up daily. And it's easy to get off track and only focus on those fires and lose the bigger picture. And then money management. 38% of master's students, 36% of doctoral students worry about their ability to meet monthly expenses. And I'm sorry, the stat that I was mentioning earlier when I said over half was students who are feeling stressed about their financing. A lot of universities are recognizing this and really trying to help students. And so they're partnering, they're either doing it themselves with their own financial aid office or partnering with financial institutions like banks or third parties to really provide budgeting support, saving, investing, student loans, debt management, tax help, how to finance education. So there's so many resources that either your banks have or your universities have, and people either don't know they exist or they're just not kind of participating in them. And it's really, really helpful. I remember, this is not when I was in grad school, but I recently met with our benefits office and I was blown away. And I'm like, I've read this stuff a million times, but when the actual pro sat down and walked me through it, it really helped provide context. And many schools are working to provide these services. You can't really see the one on the right, but that's on the left, you'll see Vanderbilt, they're putting on programming around budgeting, and then UCLA is on the right, and they have financial wellness appointments. So I really encourage you to just really check with your various institutions or your educational institutions or your financial institution to really see. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is because this is such a major stressor for so many students. It was a major stressor for me, and I wish I had some of these resources just to kind of help navigate. So again, here's kind of the list, but I want to tell a story, and then so the reason why this is important. So we had here's a story of two lumberjacks, and there was an older gentleman who had been around for decades, and then we had this young kind of up and coming lumberjack that you see on the right, and so he comes in, he's new to the community, and he's very kind of, macho and kind of very cocky, and he's like, I'm the best woodcutter, I'm the best lumberjack here, and everyone kind of chuckles, and he gets even more incensed that they're laughing at him, and they're like, well, Jim, Jim can beat you. He's the best lumberjack we've ever seen. He's like, this old guy, like, there's no way that old man can beat me. And so Jim could really care less, but he's like, sure, let's do a competition. So they go out, and start of the day, they go to their respective areas, but they can kind of see each other. And the young lumberjack just starts hacking away. And he looks, and Jim is sitting down. He can't quite tell what Jim is doing. He just knows he's not chopping wood. And he's like, he's too old to even get started, and he's like, I got this. And so he's starting off strong, and then he finally sees Jim get up, and then about an hour later, Jim sits down again, and he's like, oh, this old man, there's no way that he can keep up. And so the day progresses and Jim sits down again and takes out some lunch and eats. And the guy is, feeling really good about himself. But then as the day went on, like his pile was way higher than Jim's initially, but then Jim started catching up and he couldn't wrap his head around it because he's just hacking away and he's stronger and he's, and at the end of the day, Jim cut more wood. And the guy's befuddled. He's kind of like, I don't understand. Like, how were you able to do this? And Jim just kind of looked at him and winked and he said, I sharpened my axe. And so when they first started cutting, Jim sat down and sharpened his axe. And then he cut some more and sharpened his axe. He sat down and he ate and restored himself and sharpened his axe. And he was able to maintain consistency, whereas the guy on the right tuckered himself out. And the reason I share that story is because so many of us, whether we're in graduate school, undergrad, or whether in our careers, we just try to approach things with brute force. We just push through without really doing some of these things. And we never sharpen our axe, we never pour back into ourselves. And then we are surprised when we don't perform, when our mind is not firing the way that we think it should. Our bodies aren't performing the way that we would hope it would. And so the goal is, how do we get to a place where we actually sharpen our axes? How do we get to a time where we can actually do some of these things that we want to do and perform at a level that's helpful for us? And so again, trying to be old Jim on the left versus the young brash person. But I think sometimes we've achieved success by being the person on the right, but it's not sustainable. It's not, we can't get there. We really have to take care of ourselves and look at the long game, whether it's a 1-year program, 2-year program, 3 or 6. So just for time, instead of small groups, let's do this. Can just a couple of people maybe share, and I'm actually going to leave this slide up. Can a couple of people just share, like, maybe what's one thing that you found successful in terms of some of these wellness things? What are some of the ways that you've, some things that maybe have worked for you in terms of sharpening your axe or really trying to kind of fight this tide of all the stress and pressure that comes at us? So anybody want to share a good practice or a best practice for them in any of those domains that we mentioned?
For me, one thing that I love doing and that really helps me is to take a Sabbath. So even though, which is pretty much a day where I know that I can rest and I have to prepare, because on those 6 days in advance, I need to make sure that I get all my work done so that I can have a day off.
Yeah, and I love that, because there's some scriptural backing to kind of doing that, but it focuses you during the week, right? So you have to say, let me organize everything so I can actually rest. Let me organize things so I can actually have that restoration time for myself. I think that's really wise. Thank you for sharing that. How about someone else? I see a hand that went up. Angela.
Hi, this was wonderful. I can share for sure my top 3 are making sure I stop to sleep instead of trying to work through with a headache or work through something exhausted. It's like, go to bed, even if it's 4 or 5 hours, and being fresh makes so much of a difference. And then definitely exercising, because that, it just, I was playing basketball, not even on purpose, just ended up playing some basketball. I was like, oh my God, this feels so good. But just to get that stress out of your body, to get the tension out of your body, it really makes a difference physically and mentally. And can't stress, of course, your spirituality, because when it's all said and done, it's like, you know, why are we worried? Why are we overwhelmed? We're really not doing enough praying probably, and we're really not putting enough on God's plate and trying, like you said, we're trying to do everything instead of letting him open doors and give us favor and, you know, catch us up. And if you, I literally make your prayer list, God, let me catch up this week. He will do that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of wisdom there. So thank you all for sharing. And I tell people, I will take a well-fed, well-rested student who can give me 2 hours of studying any day over an exhausted, tired, hungry student who for 6 hours. You're just not effective. And we approach it like just sheer force and thinking the more time, but it has to be actually quality time. It's just something to think about. So really quickly, I just want to share before we wrap up. As we're going through our own stuff, sometimes we often notice other people struggling, other people that we care about, or just people that we come across who might be going through some things, and oftentimes we feel very stuck. Of not knowing, how do I have a conversation? Do I even say anything to them? Because we don't feel equipped. We don't feel like we have the skill set to provide that support. And so there's a lot of resources out there to help you. Mental health first aid is kind of a broad term, but it's also an organization that provides training and a tool set to really help you and help others. And so whether it's just friends or family that you have, or whether you're working with students or in your various capacities, there's formal trainings that you can take to really help. And I think as the society we've moved, we've done too good of a job of promoting counseling and mental health. Say, hey, you have an issue, go see a therapist, go seek out mental health resources. And I think there's a lot of other support that are out there that doesn't necessarily require that you go straight to see a licensed professional. There's a lot of support along the way that could be really meaningful to students and actually serve them in the moment versus straight referral. Now, of course, we want to let people know about mental health resources. We want to equip them with that. But there's also a lot of things out there that can help you notice and help people on good paths. So I just want to be clear, I'm not saying you need to be anyone's therapist, but there's a whole range of things that could be really powerful for students. And so as you're just thinking about supporting others, being a bystander, just recognizing that something's going on. I think often we see things happening and we're like, oh, is it my place to say anything? And I think if you're coming from a loving place and a non-judgmental place, then it could really have a positive impact. Sometimes we go in too hot though, and it's like, well, if you just did X, Y, and Z, then you wouldn't be dealing with this. And I'm sure you've had times where people did that to you and it did not feel good. And so we really want to be mindful of how we approach others, but really checking in with them, seeing how they're doing. Hey, I noticed that, it seems like you've been really stressed, or I noticed that these things have been happening, and I'm here for you. And I'll walk alongside you to help you get to the right place. One of the huge myths is, especially, there's so many people who talk about suicide and harm themselves, or thinking about harming themselves. And people think, well, if I mention it, then it's going to put it in their head. It's the actual opposite. You being very forthright and checking in with someone and asking them, have you thought about harming yourself? Are you thinking about harming yourself in any way? That actually is quite effective and therapeutic. And so please, again, if you don't remember anything else, that is not a bad thing to inquire about in a loving and supportive way. Giving reassurance and information, this stuff is real. Mental health is real. Addictions are real. But people can't recover. I wouldn't have a job if people didn't have results. But approach people with dignity and respect. And again, like I said before, don't blame them. A lot of times we think we're helping, but sometimes those messages can be really hurtful, which is why it's good to kind of get formalized training. And some of these are really, you know, it's not like you have to get a new degree in this, but they're just really layperson skills that can be really helpful. And then as needed, really encouraging people for professional help or some other type of resource. I think one thing I just want to mention on this, a lot of people are really worried. A lot of students I work with, especially if their friend or roommate or romantic partner is struggling with mental health, they carry so much of the weight on themselves. They're up all night on suicide watch, or they're like seeing if making sure people are taking their meds or making sure they're going to their appointments. And that's not for you to carry. You know, of course, we want people to be loving, but your job is to identify, let people know you love and care for them, and then help them along to the right places. But it's something I really noticed, especially in faith communities where there's just kind of this sense of really wanting to support and help, but then carrying on too much of a burden that actually starts to affect your mental health. And then really encouraging people to engage in self-help and other support strategies. There's such a wide range of options for people, whether it's asynchronous learning, where they can get apps and support, whether it's meeting with a therapist, whether it's getting medication, whether it's groups. There's a lot of different things, all the way from subclinical support to hospitalization that people can really really empowering and then encouraging people to kind of contribute to their own recovery and wellness. Another trap that people often fall into is you're actually working harder than the person to try to get them help. And then of course, that puts kind of an additional burden. And so here's just some examples. Like I said, mental health first aid from the National Council for Mental Wellbeing is a really cool program. And again, their pillars are identify, understand, and then respond. And that's a really cool course. And then Vector Solutions, which used to be Everify, they have a college student mental health and wellbeing training that schools can purchase. You actually might see someone you know on the video. It's so funny when I go to national conferences, they're like, hey, I saw you. But they invited me to I was interviewed for some of the topics that they talked about. But that's just a resource for students. And then individual schools have their own resources. At USC, we have Trojans Care for Trojans, where if you notice someone struggling, or if you're worried about someone, you can anonymously submit a report to our campus support and intervention office. And if it's a mental health issue, they'll kind of connect the students with us. At the bottom, UT Austin, they have a campaign, Be Vocal, or again, bystander kind of acts. And I'm pretty sure many of your institutions have something similar. And if they don't, I would really recommend that, whether student affairs or provost office or the health system really kind of provide some of these resources to really help out folks. And so again, as you're looking to take care of yourself and engage in good practices from a holistic viewpoint, as you're navigating life in graduate school, also wanting to be in a position where you can kind of help the people that you're walking alongside if and when needed. So that is all that I have for you. I know we are right at time, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm more than happy to pass it over to our MC. And if we have time, I can answer any questions. But if we're done, then here's my contact information. I'm more than happy to respond to anyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Leeks. We really appreciate all that you've shared tonight and giving of your wealth of wisdom and life experience. In terms of questions, if you have them in the chat, we'll try to make sure there's resources in the follow-up email to answer specific questions. So note that he has put his email in there for you. So that's very kind of you to do. I want to thank, again, Dr. Leeks. If you want to do an applause in the reaction thing, go ahead and do that now. I know it's not as exciting as a room full of loud applause, but I want to thank everyone who's come and joined tonight and participated in this, listening and engaging this topic. I hope it equips all of us better for our own journey, as well as the journeys of our friends and family members and fellow students around us. I also want to thank the Emerging Scholars Network, who co-sponsored that with us, the GFM Graduate Faculty Ministries in the South Central, and to Bob Truby for his work with that, to Brian Chang for running tech tonight. So you'll see there's a link to the Emerging Scholars Network in the chat as well. So thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you again, Dr. Leeks, and hope you all have a good night.